Are we?
All right, folks. I think, at least according to this this streaming platform that we are using, that we are live. So, just to be really clear to folks who are watching this, who are tuning in to watch, we're kind of just experimenting today. To be perfectly honest, this is sort of a what do they call it in inventing stuff? Proof of concept. Proof of
I
concept.
think so.
Yeah.
Yes.
So this is a proof of concept, which is basically the idea that we're just going to see if this works. And if it works, which I think that it will, I think I'm seeing people saying we're live. So insofar as it's working.
I can confirm that we're live.
Okay, good. We have Philip's confirmation that we're live. So the basic idea is we're just going to sort of see if this works. And if it does, which it appears to be, we're going to try to make this a more often thing, because I don't know. I love hanging out with Zevi and Filip and myself. And I love hanging out with all the folks that come hang out in the chats. And I just really want to do this more often. And I see Dana Trell and other folks in the comments, and I want to hang out with you guys. So welcome to a kind of Esoterica thing. This is not, I guess, a completely sanctioned Esoterica thing, because I'm hanging out with some of the most beautiful people that I've gotten to meet so far on this platform. We have Zevi from Seekers of Unity and Filip from Let's Talk Religion. And I guess what we're planning to do here is just kind of hang out, take some questions, maybe talk a little bit amongst ourselves about sort of what we're doing, what we're excited about, some philosophical ideas. Because what you guys may not know, and I don't know if I can say this in public, but I'm going to say it, is that behind the scenes sometimes, Zevi and Filip and I hang out on Zoom and just like talk about philosophy stuff, right? The real philosophy stuff. Ibn al-Arabi or the Zohar, or what we really believe about the nature of logic or whatever. And so this is the kind of thing we do in private, and it's kind of fun to kind of do it in public and, hang out with you wonderful people. But Zevi, Filip, any thoughts as we open up and before some questions start rolling in? There's like a whole bunch of comments about our beards in the chat.
I feel like I am lacking in that regard here, but
no. And also, there's been a couple of Trinity comments, so I'll leave that for later. Maybe we'll leave it for later. But Zevi, how you feeling? What you're working on?
Good. Firstly, I just want to mirror back to Justin. Firstly, thank you, Justin, for putting this together. This was really your idea, and you went ahead and initiated and scheduled a time and the software and your hosting. So thank you, Justin, for doing this. And it's been a real blast to hang out with you guys behind the scenes. And it's nice to do something a bit of scenes. It's like a interesting kind of merger there. And it's always a pleasure to be with you guys and to work alongside you. And I'm looking forward. Filip, how are you? How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I feel basically exactly the same way that you do. I'm very happy to be doing this, and thank you, Justin, for putting it together. Like you guys said, it's always nice to just hang out and talk, and it's really exciting to be doing it with an audience as well. I think that's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think it'll be a lot of fun. So let's what we're going to do is just take some questions as they come in. We'll definitely get to any kind of super chats that come in. So if you really want to throw down and get a question answered, feel free to throw it in the super chat. But what are you guys working on? What do you, Zevi, Filip, what are you working on these days? What that you want to share? I know it's always our future content is that we keep our cards close to our chest when it comes to our future content. But anything that you're super excited about that you're willing to share in public?
I'm working on a bunch of stuff. I'm working on the video about Salafism, so like an introductory video about that. I've written it. I haven't shot it yet, but that's probably the next video. I'm doing some stuff about the Eleusinian mysteries, continuing my series about the religion and philosophy in the Hellenic world, which is still in the early stages, but that's a lot of fun to research that stuff, obviously. I'm planning a video. I've started writing a video about the Ebionites, the early Jewish Christian movement, which is really fascinating. But all the information, as is usually the case with all those old groups, everything comes from heresiologists and critics basically, but still, it's a fun subject to talk about. I'm also working on something else which I forget. Yes, I'm doing a video about the Picatrix, the Rayat al-Hakim, the original text from Andalusia. So those are some of the stuff that I'm working on right now.
Yeah, that's.
How about you?
Yeah, the Picatrix stuff is super fascinating. Yeah, like I said, Dan Trell's in the crowd. I want to get him on here at some point too. So Dan, I'm looking at you, modern hermeticist. I'm going to drag you into this chat at some point soon if you don't mind. But yeah, the working on the Picatrix stuff is super awesome. So, Zevi, you?
I'm in the middle of a seemingly never-ending Maimonides series, looking at Maimonides' situation and context within the Andalusian world of Islamic Aristotelian philosophy. And we actually did, earlier in the series, the three of us did a collaboration on that, and that was a lot of fun. And so I'm still working towards like the main bulk of Maimonides' philosophy, moving into the Guide of the Perplexed, and just filmed and just editing the final parts of that. And I'm really excited for, he's just an incredible thinker. It's one of these thinkers where their system is so, once you're able to kind of see on the inside, it's so deeply integrated and interconnected that it's really hard to speak about any one part without speaking about the rest of it. And that's the challenge has been to how do you order it logically in a way that makes sense for someone who's not yet initiated into the philosophy in some sense. Following up on that, I did some fun interviews with some professors that are still waiting to get their chance. So I sat down with Professor Paul Mendes Floor, who's an expert on modern Buber. We had a lovely chat. But I actually wanted to share this with you guys as well, is because there's a lot of heavy influence from Neoplatonism in Maimonidean thought in a way that's very tricky and happens without really his knowledge of it. I want to look
So Zevi's kind of going in and out, unfortunately.
more broadly at the influence of Neoplatonic thought in Jewish philosophy generally, and Goodman and Mushi.
I caught that last part, Zevi. You may want to get a little closer to your router or internet source. You're kind of cutting out a little bit, unfortunately. But yeah, that all sounds really good. Ibn Gabirol, seen your wheelhouse? Don't know. We lost Zevi to the void.
Well, we're still here.
Yeah, you stare long into it. Hopefully he'll. That joke never gets old. The Nietzsche jokes. I just want to say, to thank you for some super chats coming in from BC Clarity, Carlton Martin. Thank you for the $5 super chat, and really big thanks, NK. 50
Wow,
bucks. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, we'll get to that question. Yeah, personal mystical experiences. Wow, it gets really not from 0 to 90 in like one super chat. You can ask about people's personal experiences, mystical experiences. So maybe we'll come back to that one in a minute. But yeah, I'm happy to share. I'm happy to share mine. But Zevi, Neoplatonism, is that the Neoplatonism after you get the 6 years from now when you're done with Maimonides?
Are you muted, Zevi? I can't hear you.
Yes, sorry, I connected to a different network there. I was flickering in and out. My apologies. Yes, I do want to look at, because a lot of Maimonides mysticism, to give away a spoiler alert, is very Neoplatonic. And Neoplatonism doesn't just come to Maimonides, but it really comes to all thought of the Middle Ages and to all Jewish thought. And I would like to do some work on Plotinus and Neoplatonism in the Jewish ages, and maybe there'll be another collab in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, especially considering that for most of the Middle Ages, as much as that term exists for the Islamic world, no one could tell the difference between Aristotle, Plato, Plotinus, Proclus.
Right.
It's just like the Liber de Chalcis and the theology of Aristotle, and Yeah. It'd just be funny. I want to do that on purpose. Just like start reading, I don't know, Deleuze as if he's actually some completely other person. Just like make him just, because, Deleuze famously did this. He would claim he just would like bastardize all these philosophers on purpose. So I was like, all right,
Right.
Deleuze, you're getting the same treatment. So I'm just going to read you as if you're Duns Scotus or something.
Yeah,
It
particularly
probably worked.
It would definitely work. I mean, he loved
You
Duns
did,
Scotus.
the April Fool things you did was basically that.
Yeah. So I want to do that. But yeah, and also Zevi, I'd love for you. I don't know if it is in your wheelhouse to do an episode if you're interested, or we could do one together about sort of Maimonides as an esotericist. I'm the Levi-Strauss
Yeah.
thesis, which I think I'm much more closely aligned to. I'd be interested to know, and I've often wondered this for you also, Philip, when it comes to Ibn Rushd, where I often my thinking on Ibn Rushd and my thinking on Maimonides is very similar, is that they actually probably believed very similar things under the hood.
Yeah.
That, like, I'm not, in the Decisive Treatise, Ibn Rushd says, yeah, you can't believe the world was emanated or is eternal. You're not allowed to believe that. And you can't believe that there's no afterlife. And, or another way of putting it is, you have to believe there are individual souls, that God knows individual things and individual souls, because you have to have that to get the afterlife. And Maimonides says very similar things. And it's, at least to my mind, I often think, and I'd be curious, Zevi and Philip, I think that when you look at the long commentary of Ibn Rushd, and you kind of read between the lines and some other sections of Maimonides, I think that they do believe the world was eternal and that there aren't individual souls. I don't know. I'm certainly more sure of that for Ibn Rushd than I am for Maimonides, but I think that might be what I believe about Maimonides too.
I was going to say I don't have as much experience with Maimonides as with Ibn Rushd, but I get the same kind of idea reading Ibn Rushd. That the whole thing about the afterlife or individual souls, he seems to hint that maybe he doesn't actually believe that's a thing, which is really interesting for someone from his context. Not sure about Maimonides. I'm sure Zevi can.
I think it's tricky with Maimonides. I think there's kind of two mistakes that happen when we read him. One is that we read him because he writes like these two major works, the Mishnah Torah and the Moreh Nevuchim, his work of law and his work of philosophy. And it seems like sometimes, like at least up until recently, a lot of scholarship is reading him primarily as the author of one text and secondarily as the author of the other text. He's like really a man of Jewish law, and secondarily he's a philosopher, or he's really a philosopher and he's secondarily a man of Jewish law. And I think the problem is that, like, considering how the magnitude of both of these works, it doesn't seem to me like he's writing either of them secondarily. You could argue that there's a transition in his thinking as he ages, and that we see sometimes, but to me it seems like there's a continuity in his thought. And a lot of the more recent scholarship is seeing how ideas in the Guide and ideas in the Mishnah Torah are actually common, like between the two of them. Mm-hmm. And I think that they have to be read in light of one another. So a full esoteric reading, I don't know if I would go so far. I think that's it. We're ignoring the Maimonides of lived life. We're ignoring the Maimonides of the Mishnah Torah. We're ignoring the Maimonides of his letters, what he writes to the communities around the world. And it seems sometimes the arguments, like Straussian arguments, seem a little far-fetched for that reason.
Fair enough. Yeah, I'd be curious to trace those out. I mean, yeah. Of course, the other esoteric argument is he's actually secretly a mystic, or not a Kabbalist, but something like he's much more on the Neoplatonic side of that equation. But
that's the case. I think I'll be making.
Yeah, I'd be interested. Yeah, that's another side project of mine where I just really love this whole intersection, and especially in Paris in like the 1270s and the 14th century, about this whole business of radical Averism and the weird intersection between sorcery and radical Averism, where that seems to be the two things that were all the rage in Paris, was like necromancy and Averoism, which I can kind of get with that.
Yeah.
And I find that to just be a really fascinating mixture. And then these characters, Seeger of Brabant, who's this really interesting guy who gets expelled from the University of Paris and then ends up in Dante's heaven. which all the people who you would think get in hell and who don't. I don't know. I want to go back to the super chat question. Also, just want to throw this super chat up from Derek over at Myth Vision. Is an awesome guy who inspired actually this whole thing. So Derek, you're my inspiration here, buddy, for doing some of these live streams, just because I really appreciate how Derek runs his channel over at Myth Vision. If folks haven't subscribed to his channel, he hosts a lot of really great scholars. So yeah, go check out his channel. But yeah, thank you, Derek, for the shout out. And as an atheist who actually values research into these areas, I'm in the same boat. I would call myself a non-theist, though, I think, more than an atheist. Because I think that there might be there's some metaphysical there that I want to deal more into. But to go back to the big super chat earlier about mystical experiences, that's obviously a super personal question, but anybody want to speak to any mystical experiences you've had? I mean, I'm happy to speak about mine, because I think that they're part of what's interesting about, or part of what I want to do about mystical experiences, is decouple them from religion and decouple them from all kinds of other things, and talk about them as just actually much more common than we would think. Actually, and I think the same is true is happening in sort of phenomenology of hallucinations now in psychology, is realizing that hallucinations are way more common than people think they are. Like if you've ever had the moment where your phone vibrates and you check your phone and it didn't,
Right.
welcome, you just had a hallucination. Hallucinations are very common. And I think mystical experiences are probably a lot more common than people think. And I bet people have them probably, like most times they go to museums and symphonies, or shows and stuff, like musical shows. I think that they're not probably high level, but I don't know. I've had them, the classic oceanic experience that Freud talks about at the very beginning of, was it Civilization Discontents? I've certainly had that. Am I right about that? Where he talks
Not
about
sure.
that I think it's at the very beginning of Civilization is Discontents, where he talks about the so-called oceanic experience. And I've certainly had
Describe
that.
it. I'm not familiar with it, I think.
I mean, it's like that you have the experience of sort of being absorbed into the ocean of being, like a drop of water into the ocean of being, where the limits of you and other are you and not you dissipate. And I think that, again, that kind of that kind of stuff is actually a lot more common than people think it is. It's just an interesting project that I have in mind of what I call the normalization of the mystical. But so that's just a thing that I think about a lot, and I say, yeah, I've had these experiences a good bit more often. But any reflections you guys have in that direction?
I'm just interested in knowing more about, when you talked about this experience, you said you mentioned museums, and I'm very interested in knowing, how can you have this experience while at a museum?
It's like, I think the experience of art. I mean, I'm thinking here of Schopenhauer, and how Schopenhauer makes the argument that art, he goes to music, weirdly the clarinet, I think, of all things, because he plays it or whatever. But that art, I think, has this power to elicit non-propositional unitive experiences. So I think Schopenhauer mentions that a good bit, and I find that to be much more, I don't know, I find that to be an interesting thing. Also, in Kant, in the third critique, he talks about the sublime and the experience of the sublime. And Kant, even in some of the footnotes, will sort of touch on how these might be a direct apperceptions of objectivity. And of course, he's terrified of going too far into that. But in the footnotes of Kant is where the devil of Hegel lives. And of course, I'm really happy to live in that world. And so at any rate, it's just those kinds of experiences. But I don't know. I feel like I want to honor the super chat question of
right.
And again, feel free to be like, no.
I have a bit of a different project, and I hate being opposed to things. I hate being anti something. I prefer to be pro things, but I have a bit of an anti-experientialist streak in me, only because so much of the discourse since Schleiermacher and James has swung so heavily in the direction of experience as the refuge of metaphysics, the refuge of belief. And generally, when the pendulum swings too far in one direction, I just want to come and nudge it back to the center. And I think that a lot of the focus on experience, and this is a critique which has been shared many times, but one which I resonate with, takes us away from the ethics of mysticism, takes us away from the practice of mysticism, takes us away from sometimes from culture and ritual and service, and the impact that it may have on our lives. And it can become the hyper focus on experience can become just another narcissistic, hedonistic, indulgent pursuit. And I do want to bring the attention away from the experience for that reason, towards asking, like, what is the experience perhaps teaching us about ourselves, maybe even about reality, and about how we might live with one another. So that's, and there's also like a philosophical critique of experience, which goes back all the way to Plotinus, and many mystics, East and West, share it, that the notion of experience itself is a dualistic one. And in reality, every moment of being is experiencing being itself. And the mystical tradition that I grew up in also shares that sort of anti-experientialism, where it's like every moment is an experience of the divine. So that's my own personal axe to grind against experience.
Right. That's far better than the direction that I want to swing, which is like radical propositionism, that's my temptation, is like, if it's not if it's not expressible in propositional form, then it's not real. So that's a much more healthy take.
I was gonna just like tell you some stories about experiences, but I feel like that would be really inadequate following the very eloquent notes by Zevi. But
no, good try.
Yes, I would say, I've had experiences that I would perhaps call mystical. I mean, nothing crazy. There's one story I always tell, which is it feels like a cliche, because it's all the usual stuff about, you know, oneness and whatever. Like I was fasting and I was meditating for a long period of time, right? And then so before I even went into the meditation, I had this strange feeling of like there was how do I explain this? Like there was this feeling of emptiness. Like I experienced my body, and then there was like nothing behind that very apparent physical aspect of what I was experiencing of myself. And then after that, I went into meditation for like half an hour, and it was pretty intense as a meditation. And then as I came out of that, wasn't feeling anything in particular until I walked into the kitchen and I looked my wife in the eye, and suddenly I had this really strong sense that I was looking at myself. This really overwhelming feeling that I just knew that to be true, right? And so not just intellectually, it was like this really direct feeling that I knew that this was true. Now, I don't know if it was true, but that's what I was feeling at the time. And it stayed like that for a few minutes afterwards. And I was pretty... it was a pretty powerful thing at the time. I remember we were eating afterwards, and I was shaking and everything. So that was probably the most powerful one I've had. And then, of course, I'm always analytical and skeptical afterwards in trying to analyze what happened. But still, that was a pretty interesting experience.
I mean, it reminds me of Eckhart, right?
Sure.
The eye that sees me. I can't remember how it goes. Well, Eckhart's always like some.
Is it the eye with which I see God? It's the same eye with which God sees me.
Yeah.
Maybe I've been reading Eckhart earlier that day.
Yeah, that would be great and terrible though if the mystical experience that we got just happened to be the one that we were reading that day. I'd be in bad shape. I would be very, that would be bad. Well, thank you guys for sharing. I mean, I think what's just fascinating about this, and this is, I think, speaks to the work that we do, and it speaks to the interesting aspect of the work that we do, is that we never get to separate ourselves from ourselves. We're always people who've had experiences and bring those experiences to things that we're academically interested in. And yet, I think, and I'll toot our own horn a little bit, that we work really hard, and when we do it right, we accomplish something really and special, in that we let those experiences inform us in ways that inspire us, and yet we work hard to maintain an academic objective approach to the material that that is important to us. And so I find that that's just that's a delicate balance to be having. And I think it's easy to see maybe on the side where we're just like presenting things dispassionately on YouTube that, oh yeah, back behind us is people who have philosophical commitments and experiences that are deeply shaped by these kinds of experiences or not. So I don't know. I think that's a really fascinating aspect of this.
And I think there's definitely there's a place, and I think there's a value to talking about these topics from a position of appreciation and from an inspired point of view, right? Rather than just completely dry in a sense, because that can be inspiring to others in learning more about it, or
right, and also to destigmatize them. That it's I think that as much as we are people who are making content that people are absorbing and learning from, that one can be academically rigorous and scholastically rigorous, and at the same time be interested in actual these experiences or the consequences of them in terms of how it transforms lives and communities. I think that's more to Zevi's point, that it's not just about some navel gazing to not to hit the hesychasist, but it's not about that so much as it's also about the much more deeper impact these experiences have, or the what's downstream of them in terms of these kinds of things. So I think that's a really fascinating. Although it cuts both ways. I get so terrified reading medieval mystics when in terms of like the ethics that they seem to derive from those mystical experiences.
True, yeah.
I like read those guys. I'm like, read Hildegard of Bingen, and she's like, yes, I experienced the infinite love of God, and now we must liberate the Holy Land from the infidel. Like, oh God, you had me on that. You had me on part A.
Yes.
It's when you zagged over to part B that gets.
Hildegard. No, I definitely don't. I don't read any of these mystics as canon or as the word of God, but I mean they're humans too, and they're certainly making mistakes, and we can use our own, like when it comes to the scholarship, where we try to have our own inspiration and motivation, and yet remain open to being wrong and to changing our minds. Also, when we read the mystics and people that we can otherwise be.
If you can hear us, Zevi, you cut out again. I think.
It's interesting sounds in the background.
You're back, I think.
Are you back?
I'm back.
Okay. Good.
Sometimes it sounds like an Atari 2600 game in the background. Sorry, that shows my age.
There are certain things that they won't let me say here. They're gonna hold it back.
the Ascended Masters.
Yes.
I saw an interesting, and I'm bringing in some stuff from Dan Trell, who's Dan Trell, for folks that know, the Modern Hermeticist, is a content creator who I really, really appreciated. He's a historian of ideas, working in Renaissance, Hermeticism, and Kabbalah, and all kinds of things. And we're going to bring Dan on if he'll come on. But one of the things he says, it's for him, what's interesting, it's about the history of the language we use to describe the one. And that also is really interesting to me. It's just from the philosophical side of things, is just how we marshal language and thought to make sense of experience in general, but also to think about how philosophical the tools of philosophy and religion are brought to bear on these kinds of problems, and also kind of the ways in which they continue to be brought to bear, despite the fact that some contemporary forms of science think that they have escaped them, or some contemporary forms of philosophy, like the logical positivists, think that they've escaped them, when in fact I think that they definitely haven't.
Right.
And they may be in fact inescapable, for better or worse. Wow. All right, folks. Well, let me check the time real fast, because I don't want to keep these guys too long, but have an hour or something, maybe another half an hour if folks are around. But happy to take questions if you have specific questions for us about the topics that we work on, or just personal questions, or just any kind of things you'd like to hear us talk about. But there's one comes through here. Nathaniel Smith, thank you for the super chat. Would you consider thoughts or ideas to be living things? Sometimes they seem to have us rather than we them.
Interesting.
Yeah. Idea realism.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess there's maybe two questions there. One, would you guys, with either of you, find people be open to a Platonic view of ideas, whether mathematicals or other ideas that say that they have ontological status at all, any metaphysical status? And then two, I think the other question would be, could you think of them as a as a living thing?
I have a complicated relationship with Plato, with the whole world of forms, which I think, you said once in your live stream, I think, Justin, that Plato is one of those thinkers that you love, but you just don't agree with.
Yeah.
And I have some of the same tendencies, although I do feel like some of the later Platonists, like Plotinus, for example, or even later still in the Islamic world and so on, take that basic idea and formulate it in a way that is more appealing and more sort of elegant to me. So I'm open to the at least some form of that idea. Whether they have, like, are we talking if they have objective existence outside of our subjective awareness, or where are we in this?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that would be at least part of it. For them to be alive, I suspect they would have to have some kind of objective, ontological status apart from us.
I think there's also a question of language here, like you were saying, Justin, about experience and how we describe the one. When we talk about something being alive, I think there's different ways that we're using that word. We could be talking about a biological fact, or we can be talking about an ontological fact, as you're saying, or we could just be talking about the fact that something that's alive is something that changes and mutates and grows. Like a meme is something that's living. And so I think from that perspective, languages definitely can be alive and definitely can have us as opposed to us having them. And they continue to grow and they mutate and they change over time. And they could be very powerful ideas that are very alive in some sense. And I think in some certain usages of the word alive, we could sense ideas that are alive to us, and ideas that bring us life as well.
Yeah, in philosophy, we use that language, like whether a thought is alive. Like that's at least a metaphor we use to think about whether a form, like is Pascal's wager alive? Like sometimes what is living and dead in Hegel's thought is like the famous, is a thought alive or dead? I guess that's to me a bit more metaphorical than, like that seems obviously true as a metaphor, as much as metaphors have truth values. I don't know. I guess I am. And again, this is where I'm more willing to be a little bit more like shoot from the hip here. But I at least when it comes to, and I've said this to you guys in private, but when it at least comes to logic and perhaps mathematicals, I'm much more open to the possibility that those have some kind of objective existence, that logic in the mathematicals. And I do also think that the mathematicals are deducible from logic ultimately. With all due respect to Kurt Gödel, sorry, Kurt Gödel. I think they're reducible even if they're not provable as such. But yeah, that's a pretty, I don't know, pretty slim bar to what might be. Because it is just weird. I mean, because again, like it's a simple example, right? But like pi is a non-repeating, non-terminating number. And insofar as that there is a truth value for any given position of pi, that is some integer between 0 and 9, that every single one of those to infinity has a truth value. That means that there are truth values that exist and are true or false for that any position of pi, regardless of whether or not we ever find it. And that just speaks to me the possibility that as a mathematical object exists independently of us, i.e., that we discover it, not invent it. It seems at least reasonable for me to hold that position. Now, of course, irrational numbers irks up against Philip. I'm thinking of your recent episode on Pythagoreanism, and the irrational numbers really bothered them a lot. But I don't know. I find that stuff it's eminently reasonable.
It seems that way. I mean, as my students will tell me, math is not my strong suit, but it seems to me that there is some truth to what you're saying, that when it comes to mathematical in maths and geometry, there seems to be certain ideas or certain truths that just seem to be objectively true to some degree, at least on a surface level. So I tend to agree.
Yeah.
I think from a very like simple layman's perspective, and I don't want to speak about fields that I have no knowledge or expertise in, but like the physical science of reality, the fact that anything at all is able to make sense and we're able to make predictions that hold true, the fact that the universe is somehow seems to follow patterns at all and can be computed and worked with mathematics is maybe the most astonishing thing like at all. And that does speak to some that there may be after all some sense, some order, some reality to numbers beyond us.
Yeah, it's one of those avenues of thought that it's just, I think it's interesting in the idea that if thoughts are alive or have some independent existence. I don't know. I'm less convinced of ideas, I guess. I think this is maybe a deflationary, but I tend to be much more of the, insofar as I believe in ideas at all, I tend to be much more of the reflectionist camp than them having independent existence. Definitely not. I mean, I don't know how far you're willing to go with your potential love-hate relationship, Philip, with Plato, but definitely not willing to go to the idea that they're out there and you participate in them and like methexis and all that stuff. That seems trying to explain that to undergraduate freshmen philosophy 101 when you get to Plato's Republic, you're like, you participate in the number 8 when you think about it. They're like, I participate in the number 8. I'm like, yep, we're doing it right now. We're participating in it. And they're like, I don't feel like I'm doing it. You are. You're participating in it. I don't know. I love that stuff.
And I think ideas can be alive, like basically what Zevi said, that ideas are alive because they that we have them. We spread ideas. Ideas have a life of their own within our communities, within our world of ideas. But in terms of independent existence, I'm not as convinced.
Yeah, me neither. Except for maybe in a Hegelian way, but even then, that's a temptation for like 11:30 at night when I've had a bit too much red wine or something. I'm like, oh yeah, the ideas.
There's a beautiful like poetic sense here, which what's his name, Jorge Borges. He writes about like ideas, like the sense that we think that an idea only exists insofar as the humans thinking them. But he's like, but then we have ways of capturing and like condensing ideas with like this magical thing called words, and then ideas can like move throughout time and repossess individuals and like kind of grab, like re-enter the psyche. And he plays these ideas like different characters, like a Christian in the Middle Ages and a Muslim 300 years later, and then an atheist walking down in Amsterdam, and like the way that ideas move between like time and between people and keep coming back to do what they need to do. It's a beautiful, I mean, poetic, but a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I wonder. I mean, it'd be interesting to try something. Like, I've always wondered that if I could sit down with Thomas Aquinas, and if I had have folks ever seen the one of the best resources that you can get is the Thomas Aquinas lectionary. There's like an entire glossary just of Thomas Aquinas's use of Latin, because I mean he has such a crazily technical use of Latin, particular the scholastics, but really it's learning how he uses like the 15 different ways he uses the word essay or something. And sometimes I wonder if I could sit down and have a conversation with Thomas Aquinas or Duns Scotus or something, and even follow what in the world they're talking about. Even if I had my little cheat sheet, lection, I don't know. And even if we'd be hitting the same targets ultimately when we're talking about the same things, because I definitely will say that when I read Duns Scotus or someone like Duns Scotus, I don't think any philosopher is still working on those kinds of stuff anymore. I don't know. And I feel that's the way sometimes when I sit down and talk to Heideggerians. I don't know if you've ever had the unfortunate if a Heideggerian ever imposed themselves upon you, or a Levinasian, Zevi, I think it maybe more possible that you've bumped into a Levinasian in the wild. But God, sometimes I sit down with someone of those people and I'm like, the face of the other's being is the other's being's of face is the being of face of justice. And I'm like, I have no idea what the hell you're talking about. And I hear conferences of Levinasians and Heideggerians talking, and they're all saying the same 60 words over and over again. And somehow they're producing journal articles and books, and and then you add the Kabbalah in there, and the Elliot Wolfson pops out somehow, and the language games involved in that is just I don't know. It's really a nutty thing.
Something that Zevi said remind me of, speaking of the existence of ideas out there. I think this is probably a pretty common Platonic idea, right? But I connect it specifically to, I think it's Mullah Sadra in the Islamic tradition, who has this idea. Well, it's basically the idea of the intellect, right? The intellect, in which all knowledge is contained, essentially, all the forms in Plato's terms, and that any when we learn something, when we discover something, when we're experiencing something, or when we say we come up with an idea, we're not actually coming up with that idea. We're just discovering something that was already there. And all our lives, we're basically going through this process of rediscovering something that we already know in our sort of in the intellectual parts of our being. It's an appealing idea, but I don't know if I buy it entirely. But I think it's a nice idea.
It's the Meno, right?
Yeah.
It's that scene in the Meno where Socrates is sitting there with the slave, and like, you're not learning, you're remembering. Yeah, it's a beautiful idea in the Meno. Man, I wish I had such a difficult time remembering mathematics.
It is there in Plato. It's an idea which also makes its way into the Jewish tradition of this really beautiful myth of the child in the womb that learns like all of wisdom, all of Torah until they're born, and then they forget it. And the notion is that when you relearn wisdom, when you re-encounter Torah in your life, you're just like remembering what you already taught in the mother's womb. It's like just a really beautiful notion.
There's a lot of smart fetuses out there. Also, I like the idea that it also speaks to the trauma of existence. I can always get down with a little trauma of existence. That being born is the worst thing that can happen. The second worst is death, but being born is the worst. Everything else is not so bad. I can get with that. The old
you got
joke,
real
right?
gloomy there, Dustin.
What do you say, Zevi?
Said you got real gloomy there.
It's not gloomy. Just because it's the worst doesn't mean that it's like it's inherently bad. But I don't know. I'm not so sold on existence. Now that neither are the rabbis either, right? The rabbis even say that they all got together and said, "Yeah, it'd be better if no one were born." But now that you're here, don't muck it up.
Sure.
I've always I think I've taught that on Yom Kippur. But yeah, I've always liked that. Let me see if there's some stuff in the chat. I'm seeing a lot of interesting things on the chats and live streams are the wild west of YouTube.
Yep.
Yeah, you have to we may have to eventually hire a moderator. My God. Needs more cowboy. It needs more cowbell. Yes, everything needs more cowboy. Oh, here we go. Here's the chat.
Alyssa might be able to moderate. She's sitting here with us.
Oh, okay. You have to get like a really hardcore. You have to get two moderators. You have to get a Jordan Peterson moderator, and then like the social justice warrior moderator, so they can they balance each other out. You couldn't just have one. Otherwise, you just get like Stalinist censorship, or some libertarian nightmare. Why isn't the word philosophy defined in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy? Is it not?
No idea.
I don't know. I guess it might not be. I mean, I can imagine, at least from a technical reason, why it wouldn't be. Because encyclopedias don't define words. There's that.
Right.
I think this is a dictionary fallacy. When I'm arguing with someone, they'll quote the dictionary to me. I'm like, a person is this, right? And I'm like, yeah, that's Merriam-Webster's dictionary, whatever, says a person is this or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, dictionaries tell us how words are used, not how they're defined. Philosophy tells us how they're defined. Because if dictionaries told us what words meant, we would have to never do philosophy. If you wanted to know what God or mysticism were, you just look it up and you'd be done.
Right.
You would just go to the Oxford, Standard Encyclopedia of English, or the Stockholm of Swedish, or Ben Yehuda, and you'd be done and you walk away and go home. But dictionaries don't do that. So I think that you may be expecting Oflamo. I think you may be expecting an encyclopedia to do something that it may not do. But encyclopedias and dictionaries don't do that.
You could definitely have an encyclopedia entry on philosophy, though. One of my favorite facts about Wikipedia is that if you click like the first link enough times, it will always bring you back to philosophy.
Yeah, good to know. I think also there's a great joke in Google that if you Google the word recursion, it'll. Did you mean recursion? Yeah, that humor is so bad, but it's so good.
If you type in difference into Google, it will ask you if you meant difference. It's clearly it's not postmodern.
No, God, thank God though. I mean, can you imagine a Derrida-inspired postmodernist search engine? It'd be like you type in metaphysics, and it's like, did you mean deconstruction? God, it would be so. That would be so. That would be terrible. No, I don't think that. Yeah, I don't think that philosophy can be defined that way anyway. And thank God, though. It'd be terrible if it could be. It'd be terrible if it could be.
What's your on 1 foot definition of philosophy, Justin?
Oh, on 1 foot. Luckily, I'm sitting down. So, I guess what I can say is when I teach my students in Intro Philosophy 101, which it's really funny to think that people and the Esoterica crowd people can't imagine me teaching just like Philosophy 101, but that's actually most of what I do. But I think that when I do philosophy, I tend to teach it as the attempt of human beings to understand absolute reality using reason. I think that's typically, and that's a very Hegelian way of defining it. It's the attempt. It's the attempt at the absolute via reason, because I think that religion has other tools available to it, and it has reason too. But religion has other tools available to it that philosophy maybe doesn't have, and science has lesser tools available to it, because it's getting at the absolute via the experimental method, which is actually a very, very meager tool. At the end of the day, it's a very circumscribed tool.
Yeah.
But I think that in that way, it uses reason and reason alone. I mean, I tend to think that that's exhaustive of philosophy. No, I think that there are philosophers, right? If you think about it as a spectrum, right, from the experimental method, reason, and then religion over here using a larger gamut of things. I think that people often, Thomas Aquinas is somewhere over here sometimes, and people are all over that spectrum. And so I think philosophers are often all over that spectrum as well. But I think it has to do with the absolute, and I think it has to do with reason ultimately. And I think that if you're trying to find provisional truths, like provisional truths about race or something, you're probably doing anthropology or something. But if you're not looking for absolute truths, I don't think you're probably doing philosophy. Because who wants to do an ethics in which you get sort of a provisional ethics?
I was just going to ask about ethics. So ethics has to be an absolute.
It seems to me, that
and political philosophy as well.
Yeah, I mean, metaphysics has to be dealing in absolutes, because you don't. I mean, I always ask my students, right, that I'm perfectly happy if you're willing to be. If you can go down the road of moral relativism or something, whatever. I'm like, all right, as long as you're willing to be the exception to the rule. And I'm like, how many people here want to be the exception to the moral rule? And no one raises their hand. And I'm like, yeah, it's one thing to be like the edgy kid and the edgy guy in class in ethics who's like, I don't believe in ethics. Like, I'm whatever, left-hand path. And I'm like, do they throw you out of a window? And then you're thinking to yourself, man, I wish they didn't throw me out of that window unjustly.
Justin, are there any questions come up in the chat? Because we could talk between the three of us. We could talk for forever.
True, yeah. So let's see if there's some stuff that's coming up that's interesting. Talk amongst yourself.
Alyssa, do you see any good questions in the chat?
Yeah.
What's your favorite religion?
Oh, that one? My favorite one, or the one I think it's.
Philip, how many times have you been asked that question?
Too many times.
To ask that question, you should have to do a super chat to ask there.
I hear those words when I wake up in the morning, just on the
I often wonder what people mean by favorite.
Yeah.
I think they were talking about the food. I think that's what they're talking about. The cuisine.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Hinduism wins that one.
I mean, Sikhism is pretty good.
Oh, that's true too. Yeah, and you get it for free in Sikhism.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we have to go to yeah.
We answered the $1 million question.
Free delicious food. Yeah, so that would be that's a good answer. It can't be like Anglicanism. They're not going to win on that game. It can't be Ashkenazic Judaism either, Zevi. We're in the long. It can't be the food in our team either.
Do you know what though? I'm sliding into something of a particularism here, because if you're in your culture and you so enjoy like a deep overnight roasted kugel, then there's nothing that's going to beat that.
Yeah.
Even if objectively it's like it's a horrible food.
That's hard to say. I don't know.
We're gonna start offending people.
Yeah, that's funny. I will say that I often, every time I read like texts from the Pali Canon, like Theravada Buddhism, with all the lists, I'm every time I read that stuff, I'm convinced that they're right. I'm like, yep, the Buddha was right. Like, I'm just not gonna do the hard work. It's too much work.
Just in general, or are we talking food still?
No, because Buddhism is. I don't think Theravada Buddhism is going to win on the food front. But just in terms of the truth front, I'm like, any religion with this many lists has to be right. That's why I always like the Mishnah more than the Gemara. I just like lists of things. I'm a very list oriented.
In some ways, these great religious texts preempted the BuzzFeed listicles of the internet age.
No, Existential is 99. I will say that Existential 99 is like a super fan of all three of our channels, and just many thanks for how awesome you are and your really kind comments and support. You really, I'm sure I've seen them on all of our channels, and just that kind of love, man. I don't know. I think we've said this in private and also in public, just how, like, of course we all get nasty comments because it's the internet or whatever, but God, the amount of positive, just like, I will say that reading the comments on YouTube often makes me reaffirm my faith in humanity, which is, well, I thought I would never say that about the internet growing up on the wild days of IRC chat rooms in the early 90s. But yeah, thank you so much.
It is really beautiful. I particularly commenters that come back and again to share their
You're disappearing. Hold that thought.
The Ascended Masters are really
appreciation. Like, it's I wonder. I'm back here.
Yes, you're back.
So in someone who's writing comments, mine, it's just like a second, but like as a creator, it means so much to me to, like, for people to share that appreciation and to share that feedback. And it definitely helps me ignore all of the insane, who knows, whatever garbage people write there. But it's really a beautiful thing, and I want to say, like, I really appreciate it, everyone that comes and shares their appreciation.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, let me scroll back up and see other comments.
Alyssa tells me that someone in the comment section asked, how many hours a day do we read?
Oh God.
I mean, that depends so much on the week or the. Sometimes I don't read for 2 weeks. Sometimes I read 6 hours a day. It really depends. It's in phases for me, basically.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's probably 2 or 3 hours a day, probably, between like my personal reading, my channel content reading, and then just like reading at night when I'm just trying to settle down.
Yeah,
it's probably at least a couple hours, 2 hours, 2 or 3 hours a day. Is that right? Yeah, that has to be right. Like, I'm rereading Hegel's Logic right now, which is a beast. I'm reading Hegel's Logic, and then I'm reading Kaczynski's biography of Aleister Crowley at night. It's just like the most, like, I'm just in the weirdest headspace ever. It's like, it's the most bizarre headspace.
It's great what you can do with combinations of books. I think I'm with Philip, where it depends on what I'm doing at the time. So if I'm preparing for an episode, there'll be a lot of reading that goes into that, and I appreciate that opportunity. And then also with like just with the nature of screens and everything, I don't love screen reading. So like when the end of the week, when it's Saturday, when Shabbos comes, that's when I get most of my reading done, and I can read for on a long Shabbos, I can read for 6-7 hours.
Yeah. Also, that's something also I'm trying to transition doing, is not doing any work reading on Shabbat, just like doing some kind of uplifting something that's inspirational. It doesn't have to be Jewish, but something that's like, you know, not technical stuff. It's a cool one from Aaron Sherman. Thanks, Aaron. Aaron writes, mysticism is either seen as intensely personal or mentor-student focused. How can academic tools be brought to bear on something so individual without just being history? Do you struggle with this?
We spoke about this last time we had a chat, I think. It's a tough one.
I think what I'll say, just maybe to open it up, is I think part of how to inoculate against the realities of that, or just to admit that academia can only take you so far to this stuff. Just to be like, look, we can present them as ideas. I can't present anyone's experience at all. That's not even possible. Like, I can't even pretend to do that. And also, it also means I can't discount anyone's experience, which is also crucially important. That if a 2nd century Gnostic has an experience, I can't do anything with that, positively or negatively, just nothing. But it means, and I'm sure you guys feel the same way, is that I think we have not just, if we were teaching, maybe I should be careful here, but if you're teaching literature or teaching Beowulf, I don't feel like I would have a moral obligation to really get across the values of Anglo-Saxon, the world that produced Beowulf or whatever. But there seems to be a very strong moral imperative because mysticism is so polarized. Either people are very pro-mystical or very anti-mystical, to really present the stuff rigorously and sympathetically and critically. And sailing between all the various skill-eye and charybdii of that, it's just super, super, super hard. And I don't know. So I think part of it is just being honest about what the actual expectations one can have as a viewer, and then being honest about the limitations of the kinds of tools that we have to do it, and then trying to do our best with those limitations. That that we're very hamstrung when it comes to other fields, because the very things that we're studying are admittedly at the very limits, are beyond the limits of the ability to communicate them at all. So we have just a ton of barriers to do what we have to do, and yet I don't know about you guys, but I feel a moral duty to do it well, and that just makes it super hard.
It's very difficult. I just reading Rumi, for example, who begins the Masnavi by saying, like a disclaimer, like everything I'm going to say from this point on is not really what I'm actually talking about, because none of this can be put into words. And then it's my job somehow to explain what he's saying, which in itself isn't what he's actually talking. It's just a really difficult thing to do. But I think I definitely agree with what you're saying, that we just have to realize the limits of the tools that we're using, and talk about, like you said, we can't talk about what an experience was like. We can talk about what that person claims the experience was like. We can recount what that person is saying about that experience or whatever he's talking about. And maybe some would argue that if we were mystics, say, and we think we have had the same experience, and then maybe we could talk about that. But for me at least, that's not, even if I did have that experience, I feel like that's not my place, at least not in this forum, to do that, but instead to keep it from that scholarly perspective. And that involves realizing that there are limits to what I can say and what I can present, essentially.
Yeah, I want to agree with what you're guys are saying and add one more thing here, which is that the academia is supposed to keep us honest and rigorous and accurate, and I think that's super important, particularly in this field. But I think there's also a side, particularly in some of the more classic scholars of mysticism, where the academia itself is a form of mysticism. And I'm thinking about Wasserstrom's book called Religion After Religion, where he looks at scholars of religion who are clearly doing something religious in their scholarship. And he singles out three, which is Sholem, Eliade, and Corbin. But a similar work has been written by Jeffrey Kripal called Palaces of Excess, I think it's called, where he looks at more scholars in that regard. And I think this is very true. When you read them, they're doing something religious. They're moving towards the absolute in their work. Sholem ends his magnum opus, The Major Trends of Jewish Mysticism, writing about the story of the Hasidic master, and the most we can do is retell the story, and that's a religious act for him, and which turns his storytelling of Jewish mysticism into a mystical act on the final page of the work. And I sense that, particularly, you mentioned before Elliot Wolfson. When I read Wolfson, it feels like he's doing something mystical. It feels like there's something. I mean, it may not be the language that we're used to, and it may be sort of a different camp of thought, but I do feel that the line between the personal, individual, mystical, and the academic, the cold, the ivory tower, may not be as strong as a line as we may think.
No, I think that. I mean, certainly that's true in personal practice. I mean, some of the best scholars of religion have been religious, things like that. I think that's true. Yeah, and also I think that what's really interesting is that, and I'm thinking about this as well, and I'm going to start writing something at some point pretty soon. And I think when I do want to write, it's going to be somewhere in the philosophy world that's somehow connected to esotericism and academia, because I don't really feel connected to either one of them at some level. I'm not a committed esotericist, and also I feel like academia is just a straitjacket that prevents getting a lot of really hardcore work done. So I'm curious about the blurring those lines in a way that is productive. And it's interesting that the people that we keep reading over and over again, Eliade and Corbin, and I think Wolfson's also a good example of this. They're perennially interesting, not because of their perennialism, but because they pushed a boundary. Bataille, I think, is one of these guys, in a way that. I'm going to romanticize a little bit, and I know all romanticism is not safe, but there's a daring on the part of a lot of those early 20th century scholars that I feel like that I don't feel much anymore when I read a lot of academic stuff. There's a lot of policing I think they're worried about, and I think that there's something very daring about a lot of that literature, and I feel that I'm very inspired by that daring attitude. But now everything is so publish or perish, and so much of it is publishing in these journals where basically what you have to do is like jump through 16 hoops to get torn down by 5 people to publish a paper that basically only exists for 25 people to read so that 10 of them can tear down what you've written. I'm like, I don't want to do that. That feels gross and hard and bad. And I don't know that it actually pushes the needle forward that much. But I think there's something really daring about those earlier folk that, I don't know, I find really fascinating, and it'd be interesting to pick that thread up and push it.
There's another scholar that comes to mind who I was just reading, and she's not doing so much of the daring you're speaking about, but I feel like reading her, I feel like there's a sense of love when you read like the classic mystics, and some of them, I mean not all of them, and I feel like in her scholarship, which is really fine and rigorous scholarship, and it's all peer-reviewed and very pristine journals, there's a real sense of love and service and worship in Diane Lobel. And I was reading some of it for Filip, work that she had done on Abraham Maimonides, and it's like, wow, she's doing something that seems, insofar as love and mysticism are very related, she's doing something mystical here with her very rigorous scholarship. I was very moved by her work.
I think the same is true. Is also reading Seekers of the Face, Malila Eshed's book on the Partsufim and the really difficult sections of the Sefer Zohar, and I feel the same way. It's the first book of academic Zohar stuff that I'm like, feels spiritually invigorating. Like it feels like it feels academically rigorous, and also like, oh yeah, this is like philosophically rich and mystically moving. So I would recommend her work highly. So But yeah, I think there's an interesting line to be towed there, and I don't know how to do it. And I don't think anyone does, but if I'm going to write anything down, it's going to be on that line.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my general thinking. I think we had another super chat. I think it's specifically for you, Zevi. So, yes or no question.
Does Zevi believe a Mashiach will come? There's like an episode, or more likely a series, knowing how my brain thinks and produces material, a series on the philosophical mysticism of the movement that I was born into and still belong to, which is Chabad, the Chabad Lubavitch movement, which is a mystical Messianic movement. And a lot of my thinking has been, I think part of the work of academia is being also transparent about our influences and our persuasions. A lot of my thinking has been influenced. If there's any mystic that's influenced my thinking, it's my own Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson. And I continue to be challenged and puzzled by him. And part of the Rebbe's work in his Messianism, and I think some of the good scholarship that's been done in this regard, is actually by Elliot Wolfson, who published a book called Open Secret, the Post-Messianic Messianism of Menachem Mendel Schneerson. I'm getting a lot of feedback. Is that from my end, or is that from one of you guys?
Sounds fine here.
Yeah.
Okay. And the basic case there, which he makes, and which I find to be true in the Rebbe's teachings, is that the Rebbe very much deconstructs the idea of a Messiah, and working with very old tradition that goes back to Abulafia and the Zohar and many of the Kabbalists, that there's a Messianic consciousness, that there's a sort of state of being which is Messianic, and which we can all partake in, and we all, insofar as we partake in ushering that state of consciousness, which is one which is unitive and loving, we are the Messiah in some sense. So I don't think that I believe in a Messiah. I would follow this deconstructed Messianic idea that we're all partaking in the Messianic project in some sense.
I think that's what my movement does too. But we want Mashiach now.
But not a Mashiach, right?
No. Just Mashiach. Yeah, there's no. Yeah, not the and not
Yeah, I mean, for anyone that knows, part of the big challenge in Chabad is the way that the Rebbe was made the Messiah, and the subsequent debates around that. And I really do hope to make some very personal and very and well researched. I mean, I've been studying these texts since I was a child. I do hope to make a series looking at the Rebbe's Messianism and what it may mean. So, but that's a project that's going to be a while in the making.
Interesting.
I will say, and I'm not sure what you think, Zevi and Philip, but I will say the closer I get to the things that I'm really passionate about and the things that I'm really personally committed to, the more and more impossible it gets to do content about them.
100%. Yeah, 100%.
Yes. Yeah.
It gets so like the imposter syndrome never sets in until I'm like working on an episode about a thing that I know that like I'm probably one of the top 10 people in the world that knows about this. And then the imposter syndrome sits right in. I'm like, oh yeah, I have no idea what I'm talking about. But,
wow,
yeah.
It's so much easier to create content about things that we don't know much about because we don't know how little we don't know about them.
We don't know how wrong we are. Yes.
Terrible.
Yeah. What is it? The Myers-Briggs effect? Not Myers-Briggs effect. Something like that. Yeah. The
Dunning-Kruger.
Yeah, Dunning-Kruger effect. Yeah. Thank you, Zevi. Yeah, but it's not just that. I think it's also just like when it's close to the bone, you feel every little word matters. Every article matters. Everything. Yeah. It's such a much more difficult, challenging thing. But
yeah.
I mean, when I was doing the video on Sufi music, I was like legitimately nervous when that video was going to come out, and I rarely am. At least at this point, I'm usually not nervous, but I was really. That one was pretty difficult, not only to make, but also in terms of releasing it.
That was a great episode. I mean, I learned so much.
Thank you.
That's also really the great thing about making content and having you guys in the community is just learning from each other. It's amazing just being able to flip on an episode while I'm cleaning dishes or doing something else or whatever, or just anytime. Just if I just want to. As much as I veg out and consume an hour-long documentary on Sufi music, just being like, oh yeah, like it's really crazy is that my friends and colleagues are making content that I really want to consume too, and I'm hedging up what I don't know about Sufism or Maimonides by really hanging out with hanging out with you guys is that you're talking at me, and then we can hang out while we talk with each other. So that's a very convenient thing to do.
I share the distinct pleasure of listening to you guys as well.
Yeah. It's become part of my Friday routine to watch your weekly episodes when I get home from work, and it's very nice.
Yeah, it just again, it's a cool community, and just I think I'm gonna try to do these live streams more and more, and I think that that people are really hungry for good, reliable information that's also earnest and in a community and relationship with our viewers and with the people that support us. And I'm really just stoked for that to be a thing we're able to do. I mean, I don't want everyone to give up the classroom. Like, I'm going back to teaching in the fall, and I think that being in that situation is really, really great. But it's just cool to have access to a technology that makes all this possible. It's great.
It's very inspiring.
Yeah, I agree.
The engagement with the audience, but also with other creators like you guys. I think it's really a lot of fun and very, very inspiring to be doing this stuff.
Yeah, because I don't know about you guys, but it can really feel, like we're kind of alone on mountains working on this stuff. It can really be, I can feel isolated. So, and Zevi is on a mountain at this point. I'm in Michigan. Yeah, or maybe Filip is in a fjord somewhere. But yeah, I'm definitely not anywhere near a mountain in Michigan. But yeah, just having the situation where we can know each other and communicate with our audience, it's just so great to get feedback and be like, oh yeah, someone in the comments is really interested in whatever, and we're like, oh, I'll go make that episode. That's fun. Or in Zevi's case, 60 episodes or whatever.
Yeah, I'm just talking about this stuff. I mean, I have my wife, thank God, but she can only bear so much of my constant talking about Maimonides or whatever. So it's good to have other people too.
I think the most challenging part of content creation, and this is all kind of new to us, for me, the most challenging part has been how like solitary and isolating of a job it is. But the most rewarding part has absolutely been the community being built with fellow creators, with you guys, and with the people in the listening community that really have a hand in like inspiring and in driving the content. So both the greatest weakness and the greatest asset which is not surprising.
Agree. All right, well, maybe one more super chat, and then so just let folks know we're gonna do one more, and I don't want anyone else to do a super chat because I don't want anyone to donate money without, or at least a question without it getting answered. But 15 shekel. Aram says, hi, I'm a fan of you all. Keep up the good work. We'll try. How do the study of these domains of knowledge you study affect, or how do you deal with existential crisis?
Oh, wow. I gotta go.
I think a question like that's going to be more than 15 shekel. We need some sort of rate.
That's the more personal. There's a vector of the more personal and the deeper philosophical. The super chat has to go up orders of magnitude. I don't know.
I mean, for me, I told you this last time, I think, but my intense interest in mysticism started basically at the same time that I was having a hard time personally with mental illness stuff and so on. I have a form of OCD, and so a part of that is that I can get what's known as derealization or depersonalization. And back a couple of years ago, I had a really tough time with that stuff. And I think studying this stuff did help in a way, not in giving me answers to my questions, but just like opening up the possibilities and having someone to talk to, whether it was, Meister Eckhart or whatever, just like hearing someone else talking about similar things that I was thinking about, and having sometimes pretty nice perspectives on them that I think did help me sometimes. I don't know if that was the reason that I got out of that place necessarily. I think was part of it, but yeah, definitely, I think that helped to some degree.
Thank you for sharing that, Filip. That's hard stuff.
Yeah.
I guess I'll speak for myself and say that the meaninglessness of existence is itself meaninglessness. Like it's like it's just never bothered me that reality is meaningless, because that's meaningless. Like that's the most freeing thing that could possibly, if anything in reality meant anything at all, we'd be in an iron cage, because all meaning would lead to that meaning, and all meaning would be derivative of that meaning. And that's an iron cage of meaning. And that would be just like, I wouldn't want to live in that universe. That universe doesn't strike me as interesting in the least bit. It's the meaninglessness of the existence that's freeing. And now, of course, that's freeing, but it's also radically encumbering, because now it means get your ass to work building a world that's meaningful, and do it despite the fact that nothing is coming to save you. Nothing's coming to give you meaning. So I've always found that to be, from a philosophical angle, much more powerful. The idea that if there were a God that gave existence meaning, that God would have to be rebelled against. We would have to snatch meaninglessness from the jaws of that God. And so I often find that the way that I deal with existential crisis is by realizing that chaos is a ladder and not a pit, and that we crawl out of it by doing the hard work. So it's freeing, but it's an encumbered freedom. Or that Hegel says that freedom is the recognition of necessity. And freedom is the recognition of the necessity that you have to do the work to build meaning. So that's, to me, that's how I cope with existential crisis, is that realizing that the crisis is actually the crisis itself is the possibility, the condition for the possibility of any meaning making.
Yeah, I think there's an important point to be made, and if you're, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not going to be going too far into that, but I think if there's, when it comes to things like meaninglessness, I don't think the answer is to cling on to some apparent meaning or to some answer to those questions, but rather to find comfort, perhaps even in meaninglessness, and see the potentiality of that. And then if you can be comfortable in that place, then you can perhaps start finding meaning from that. But I think having a base where even emptiness isn't scary,
right?
I love a good foundation to build on.
Now, I love Lacan. Lacan said that psychosis, perversion, and sort of the things that go into an existential crisis, that there is no curing it. There's just learning to enjoy your symptom. And I've always found that to be learning to get jouissance out of your symptom. I've always found that that kind of that's a great. I just love how perverted that is. It's an absolutely pervertedly wonderful thing to say.
I want to say how awesome it is that the two of you here is sharing such real personal things.
Hold on, Zevi.
We've lost Zevi to the void.
I think that a lot of people struggle with crises of meaning. I'm just saying how awesome it is that the two of you are sharing so honestly and so really about the things that you've struggled with, and I think that these struggles are not unique to anyone, and people that are coming to hear and join, and just the very fact that they know that their struggles are shared already takes off half the load. And I really congratulate you guys for sharing so bravely about your struggles and the ways out. I think for me, I grew up in a very in a religious system, a religious community that had all the answers, and the process of adolescence is coming to question those systems that we believed as children had all the answers for us. And I think I definitely turned eventually to scholarship and academia to try and find some of the answers which I needed to replace in my system that was falling apart. And I think, to speak about a large issue in one sentence, I think I've switched something from looking for the truth with capital T, and more looking to see how ways of conceptualizing reality may contribute to my own and the happiness of the people around me, and learning. And I think this is a point which James makes very beautifully, in these pragmatistic philosophy, that like instead of trying to come to some sort of absolute truth, but instead like learning that being in service and learning that giving and being there for others and adjusting our pursuits away from the self are just ways to live, generally speaking, happier, better, more fulfilled lives. So for me, the academic side has been a bit less about trying to come to some ultimate truth, and rather about learning about myself and learning about ways to live that's more fulfilling and more and more benevolent. And that's been more of the direction for me, instead of, which is, I guess, in similar lines to what you guys have been saying, away from sort of the purpose of reality.
It's
Well,
beautiful.
Yeah, I think it's. Yeah, and also I think that none of us is going to do this by ourselves. That's for damn sure.
Right.
But like I said, I don't think that none of us can do it by ourselves. Which again, great to be in good company with you fine fellas and all these wonderful folks in the chat. All right, guys. So thank you for coming along with me for this first experimental proof of concept live stream. What I want to do is kind of start doing these more with various folks. Maybe just bring you guys back on and just hang out and chat, and hang out with folks in the chat. So again, it's kind of experimental. I guess as everything we're doing is really, none of us really knows. I don't know if you guys know, but I have no idea what I'm doing.
No.
So
Never.
insofar as we have no idea what we're doing, as long as we're doing cool content creation and fun stuff together and having cool conversations and hanging out with folks and our fans, that's great. So I'm super stoked about that. So thank you, Zevi and Philip, for taking the time to hang out with me today. And but yeah, just so folks know, if you don't know Zevi's channel, go check him out over at Seekers of Unity. I have both Zevi's and Philip's channels in the chat and their Patreons, because everybody needs to keep the lights on. So we all could use to keep the lights on, keep the bandwidth up. Yeah, support the folks that you care about, who create the content that you care about. I mean, it sounds so silly. I sound like a TV ad person, but the price of like buying someone a coffee a month is basically what it takes to keep the lights on. And so you would never imagine that it really helps, but it really, really does help. So thank you guys for supporting all of our work and making what we do possible and hanging out with us and suffering through our turgid answers to complex metaphysical questions. All right, guys, I'm going to end the stream.
Thank you, Justin, for pulling this together.
Yes, thank you so much. I would love to come back anytime.
Yeah, let's make it happen, and maybe next time we'll have an actual like topic. God,
yeah.
Can you imagine an actual?
Who knows?
And we may have and a name for the trio. That's a challenge to the audience there to come up with something.
Yeah, the topic. I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, Ibn al-Arabi, go. Bezels the wisdom.
Yes.
That can take a few years. Yeah. All right, guys. I'm going to end this stream, but thank you so much for everyone in the chat for hanging out, especially for the super chats and the super stickers. And we'll see you next time.